When I was on a forced family vacation shivering in the middle of a blizzard, my phone lit up with a frantic message from my mother. Fly home immediately. Do not say a single word to your father or your sister. Just run. When I stepped off the plane hours later, the police and a trust attorney were waiting for me at the arrival gate. By the time they showed me the documents revealing the $45 million lie my family had built their lives on, the room went black, and I lost consciousness. My name is Clara. I am 32 years old, and my job as a forensic accountant is to track down missing money. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my own toxic family in less than 24 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after your family tried to destroy you. 12 hours before that cryptic text message shattered my reality, I was sitting in a wildly overpriced steakhouse in Aspen, Colorado. The dining room was a masterpiece of rustic luxury with massive timber beams and a roaring stone fireplace that did nothing to warm the absolute ice radiating from my side of the table. I was sitting across from Richard, the man I had called my father for my entire life, and Vanessa, my golden child half-sister. The two of them were laughing loudly, clinking their crystal wine glasses together as they celebrated Vanessa buying her third luxury vehicle of the year. I sat quietly at the edge of the booth, pushing a piece of Wagyu beef around my plate. This vacation was supposedly a family bonding trip, but it was really just another stage for Richard and Vanessa to parade their wealth while treating me like the hired help. They had insisted I come along, claiming they wanted to reconnect after years of distance. In reality, they just needed someone to play the grateful peasant. When the waiter approached our table carrying a leather-bound checkbook, Richard did not even reach for his wallet. He simply gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Give it to Clara," he instructed the waiter without looking away from his conversation with Vanessa. "She is handling the expenses for this trip to make up for lost time." The waiter placed the leather folder directly in front of me. I opened it and stared at the total. $15,000. They had ordered the most expensive vintage wines, multiple appetizers, premium steaks, and imported caviar. They had charged spa treatments and ski rentals to the room, knowing full well I would be the one forced to settle the tab. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up my neck. I looked at Richard expecting some kind of acknowledgement, but he was busy admiring his reflection in his silverware. Vanessa caught my eye and smirked. Her perfectly manicured fingers reached for her wine glass. "You should be grateful Dad even lets you breathe the same air as us, considering you stole Grandma's jewelry when you were 11, she said loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. The words were like a physical strike. I absorbed the insult, silently keeping my face perfectly neutral. That was my assigned role in this family. The scapegoat, the thief, the troubled child. 19 years ago, when I was just 11 years old, a valuable diamond necklace belonging to Richard's mother went missing. Without a shred of proof, Richard and my mother Diana accused me of stealing it. They packed my bags in the middle of the night and shipped me off to a cheap disciplinary boarding school 3 states away. They told everyone I was a delinquent who needed severe correction. I spent my teenage years in isolation, branded a criminal, while Vanessa grew up in a suburban mansion showered with expensive gifts and unconditional praise. What Richard and Vanessa did not know as they sat there mocking me in that Aspen restaurant was that the terrified 11-year-old girl they had thrown away no longer existed. I had clawed my way out of that boarding school, taking out massive student loans to put myself through college. I had graduated at the top of my class and become a forensic accountant. My entire career was built on tracking down corporate fraudsters, untangling webs of deceit, and finding money that corrupt people tried to hide. I dealt with narcissistic criminals every single day. I saw the micro expressions of greed and entitlement on Richard's face with crystal clarity, but I bided my time. I pulled a sleek black corporate card from my purse and placed it in the leather folder, paying the $15,000 bill without batting an eye. They thought they were punishing a struggling accountant. They had no idea I owned the firm. As the waiter walked away to process my card, my phone vibrated intensely against my thigh. I reached under the heavy linen tablecloth and pulled it out. the screen illuminated with a message from my mother Diana, who had supposedly stayed behind in Seattle due to a sudden illness. The text read, "Fly home immediately. Do not say a single word to your father or your sister, just run." My blood ran completely cold. Diana had not reached out to me with anything resembling maternal concern in over 2 decades. Our communications were strictly limited to obligatory holiday greetings and passive-aggressive comments about my lifestyle. For her to send a message like this filled with such palpable panic meant something was catastrophically wrong. My mind immediately went into investigative mode. I analyzed the situation, running through possibilities at lightning speed. My mother was terrified of Richard. She never crossed him. If she was telling me to run behind his back, the danger was imminent, and it was real. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a deep breath, controlling my heart rate. I looked up at Richard and Vanessa, who were now loudly debating which designer boutique they wanted to raid the following morning. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. "I am getting a severe migraine," I announced, keeping my voice steady and flat. "I need to go back to my room and lie down. You two go ahead and enjoy the rest of your evening." Richard rolled his eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "Always ruining the mood, Clara," he muttered, taking another sip of his expensive wine. "Go on then. Just make sure the hotel staff knows to charge our breakfast to your card tomorrow." I did not reply. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to their arrogant delusions. The moment I stepped out of the dining room and into the freezing Colorado air, my entire demeanor shifted. The meek, submissive daughter vanished. I pulled out my phone and immediately booked a first-class ticket on the next available red-eye flight out of Aspen to Seattle. I opened a rideshare app and requested a premium SUV, paying triple the standard rate to ensure the driver would brave the worsening snowstorm. I practically sprinted back to my hotel room. I did not bother folding my clothes or organizing my toiletries. I threw everything into my single duffel bag, zipping it shut with aggressive force. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of this bizarre puzzle. Why would my mother tell me to run? What did Richard and Vanessa not know? I strapped on my heavy winter coat and slipped out of the room, avoiding the main lobby elevators. I took the service stairs down to the ground floor, moving through the shadows like a ghost. The blizzard outside was intense, with heavy white flakes obscuring the luxury chalets and snow-covered pines. My rideshare driver pulled up to the side entrance, his tires crunching loudly against the ice. I threw my bag into the back seat and climbed in, instructing him to get me to the airport as fast as safely possible. As the SUV carefully navigated the treacherous mountain roads winding away from the glittering resort, I looked back at the towering peaks of Aspen. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers, pushing away the heavy snow. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, feeling a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. I had spent my entire adult life building an impenetrable fortress around myself, protecting my heart and my finances from the family that had discarded me. Now, I was flying directly back into their web. But this time, I was not a helpless child. I was a seasoned investigator, heading straight into the eye of the storm. Whatever lay waiting for me in Seattle, I was ready to face it. I just had no idea that the truth I was about to uncover would rewrite my entire history and destroy the lives of everyone who had ever wronged me. The flight from Aspen to Seattle was a blur of turbulence and recycled cabin air. I sat in my first-class seat, staring out the window into the pitch-black sky. My forensic accountant brain was spinning, constantly categorizing facts and searching for anomalies. Diana had warned me to run. Diana never warned me about anything unless it directly benefited her own survival. I gripped the armrests as the plane descended through the thick gray clouds hanging over Washington state. I had no checked luggage. I only carried the duffel bag stuffed with my winter gear and the laptop that held my entire corporate life. I walked up the jet bridge, moving with the hurried pace of a seasoned business traveler. The Seattle airport was mostly empty at this early hour, bathed in harsh fluorescent light that made everything look sickly and pale. I navigated the familiar corridors, heading straight toward the exit. I did not need to go to baggage claim. I just needed to get to a secure location and start digging into Richard and Vanessa financial records. As I rounded the corner toward the main terminal exit, my path was suddenly blocked. Two uniformed Seattle police officers stood directly in the center of the walkway. Flanking them was a tall man wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit holding a thick manila envelope. His posture was rigid professional and completely out of place in an airport at dawn. I tried to step around them, assuming they were waiting for someone else, but the man in the suit stepped forward and intercepted me. "Clara," he asked, his voice carrying a calm but authoritative weight. I stopped gripping the strap of my duffel bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Who is asking?" "My name is Mr. Harrison. I am a trust and estate attorney representing the estate of Alexander Wright. We need you to come with us right now. It is a matter of urgent legal and physical safety." I glanced at the two police officers. Their hands were resting casually near their duty belts, but their eyes were locked on me. They were not here to arrest me. They were here to escort me. As a forensic accountant, I dealt with federal agents and corporate lawyers all the time. I knew the difference between an interrogation and a protective detail. I gave a single sharp nod and followed them. They led me away from the public terminal and down a restricted hallway accessible only by keycard. We entered a small, windowless security office furnished with a metal table and a few worn leather chairs. The officers remained stationed outside the closed door, leaving me alone with Mr. Harrison. The silence in the room was suffocating. I dropped my duffel bag onto the floor and crossed my arms, refusing to sit down. "Start talking," I demanded. "Who is Alexander Wright, and why did my mother text me to flee across the country in the middle of the night?" Mr. Harrison did not flinch at my aggressive tone. He simply placed the heavy manila envelope on the metal table. The red wax seal on the back had already been broken. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Please, Clara, you need to sit down for this." I ignored his request. "I deal with multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement for a living, Mr. Harrison. I do not need to sit down to handle bad news. Just hand me the documents." He sighed and slid the envelope across the table. I pulled out the stack of papers. The first page was a certified copy of a birth certificate. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded, but the official state seal was undeniable. I scanned the lines of text. Name Clara, mother Diana, father Alexander Wright. My brain hit a wall. I read the line again. Father Alexander Wright. I looked up at the attorney, my forensic logic struggling to process the impossible data in front of me. "This is a mistake," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "My father is Richard. He is the man who raised me, the man who kicked me out." "Richard is not your biological father," Mr. Harrison said, his tone softening with an uncomfortable amount of pity. "Richard is your stepfather. He married your mother when you were 2 years old. Alexander Wright was a brilliant technology entrepreneur. He was your real father, and he died in a tragic car accident before your first birthday." The harsh fluorescent light above us seemed to flicker. A high-pitched ringing sound began to build in my ears, drowning out the hum of the airport ventilation system. 19 years. For 19 years I had believed I was Richard's biological disappointment. I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn the love of a man who looked at me with absolute contempt. I had believed I was a genetic failure, an ugly duckling born into a family of swans. Vanessa was his real daughter. That was why she was the golden child. That was why she got the cars, the mansion, the praise, while I got boarding school and public humiliation. I looked back down at the birth certificate. The letters started to swim across the page. If Richard was not my father, then the entire foundation of my abuse was built on a lie. Why would they hide this from me? I choked out the anger and confusion fighting for dominance in my chest. Why lie for my entire life? Mr. Harrison pulled a second document from the envelope. It was a massive financial ledger. "Because of this, Clara, Alexander Wright left you an ironclad trust fund. It was meant to be entirely yours when you turned 18. The ringing in my ears grew deafening. The walls of the windowless security room felt like they were rapidly closing in on me. I tried to pull in a breath, but my lungs refused to expand. The realization struck me with the force of a freight train. The stolen jewelry, the disciplinary school, the constant gaslighting. It was never about my behavior. It was never about me being a bad kid. It was a calculated legal strategy. I took a step back from the table, my hand flying to my chest. The birth certificate slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the linoleum floor. Mr. Harrison stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the ground. "Clara, breathe," he instructed, reaching out a hand to steady me. I could not breathe. The betrayal was too massive, too absolute. Every memory of my childhood twisted into a grotesque nightmare of financial exploitation. My vision tunneled the edges, turning black. I felt my knees buckle beneath me. The last thing I heard before the darkness completely swallowed me was the sound of the attorney shouting for the police officers outside the door. Section 4. The $45 million truth, 1,000 words. Cold water splashed against my face, shocking my system back online. I gasped for air, my eyes flying open. I was lying flat on the worn leather sofa in the airport security office. Mr. Harrison was standing over me, holding a crushed paper cup of water. One of the police officers was in the doorway, holding a medical radio. "I am fine," I gasped, pushing myself up into a sitting position. "Do not call the paramedics. I am fine." The officer hesitated but stepped back into the hallway at my sharp command. Mr. Harrison handed me a dry paper towel. "You went into shock," he explained, returning to his seat at the metal table. "It is a completely normal physiological response to this level of trauma." I wiped my face, my hands still trembling slightly. The weakness infuriated me. I was a professional investigator who dismantled corrupt executives for breakfast. I did not faint. I forced my heart rate to slow down, locking away the terrified 11-year-old girl inside me and bringing the ruthless forensic accountant to the forefront. I stood up, walked back to the metal table, and sat down directly across from the attorney. "Show me the money," I demanded, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Show me exactly how they did it." Mr. Harrison looked impressed by my rapid recovery. He opened the thick financial ledger and turned it toward me. "Alexander Wright was a visionary," he began. "He sold his first software company in the early days of the tech boom. When he died, he left his entire estate in a protected trust solely in your name. Diana received a generous life insurance payout, but the trust itself was untouchable. Richard realized early on that he could not access your father's wealth unless he found a legal loophole." I traced my finger over the columns of numbers, my eyes scanning the withdrawals. "A conservatorship," I stated, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "They established a conservatorship over my estate." "Exactly," Mr. Harrison confirmed. "But to grant a conservatorship over a minor trust, the court requires proof that the minor is dangerously unfit, unmanageable, or incapacitated. When you turned 11, that trust was growing exponentially. Richard and Diana knew they were running out of time before you became a teenager and started asking questions about your father. They staged the jewelry theft," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "They planted Richard Mother diamond necklace in my backpack. They called the police. They created a paper trail of delinquency." "Yes," Mr. Harrison said. "They used that police report and a series of bribed psychological evaluations to convince a corrupt family court judge that you were a severe danger to yourself and others. They shipped you off to that disciplinary boarding school, not to punish you, but to physically remove you from the jurisdiction. Once you were gone, Richard was granted full control of your estate as your legal conservator. He was supposed to manage the funds for your benefit." I stared at the ledger. For 19 years, Richard had been bleeding my father's legacy dry. I saw wire transfers for luxury vehicles. I saw massive withdrawals categorized as real estate investments, which I knew for a fact were the down payments on their sprawling suburban mansion. I saw tuition payments for Vanessa elite private schools, while I had drowned in predatory student loans to pay for state college. Richard was not a self-made millionaire. He was a parasite feeding off the corpse of the father I never knew. Every designer dress Vanessa wore, every country club dinner they hosted, every single cent they used to portray themselves as American royalty was stolen directly from my pockets. The magnitude of their greed was staggering. They had literally manufactured my misery to fund their luxury. What is the current valuation? I asked, flipping to the final page of the audit. I needed numbers. Numbers were hard evidence. Numbers were weapons. The trust is currently valued at $45 million, Mr. Harrison replied. However, it is heavily drained. Richard has siphoned off nearly $10 million over the last 2 decades. We only caught on to the fraud recently when a junior bank auditor flagged an irregularity in a massive offshore transfer request. That auditor brought the file to my firm. We have been building this case for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Why did my mother text me tonight? I asked, my forensic mind analyzing the timeline. If you have been building this case for weeks, why the sudden panic at 3 in the morning? Mr. Harrison folded his hands on the table, leaning in closer. Because Richard and Vanessa know the walls are closing in. They attempted to authorize a final $10 million wire transfer to a shell company in the Cayman Islands yesterday afternoon. The bank placed a temporary hold on the funds. Diana found out about the offshore account last night. She realized Richard and Vanessa were planning to board a private jet out of Aspen, taking the stolen money and leaving her behind in the United States to take the fall for the conservatorship fraud. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Diana did not text me out of maternal love. She texted me because she was terrified of going to federal prison alone. She wanted to use me as a shield against her own husband. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally crystallized into pure, cold calculation. They thought I was just an ugly college dropout they could discard and forget. They thought I was too broken to fight back. They had no idea they had accidentally forged me into the exact type of weapon designed to destroy them. I specialized in tearing down fraudulent empires and recovering hidden assets. They had handed me the ultimate case file, and it was deeply personal. Are the police here to arrest me? I asked, gesturing to the closed door. No, Mr. Harrison said. They are here for your protection. You are the sole victim of a massive federal crime. I closed the ledger and slid it back across the table. Dismiss the police detail, Mr. Harrison. I do not need protection. I need an injunction. I stood up, grabbing my duffel bag from the floor. Richard and Vanessa think they are flying to the Cayman Islands. They think they have won. I am going to let them believe that right up until the moment I rip everything away from them. Where are you going? Mr. Harrison asked, standing up in alarm. We need to go to the precinct. The FBI is getting involved. I slung the bag over my shoulder, my eyes locked on the exit. Let the FBI handle the paperwork, I said, stepping toward the door. I am going to follow the blood money. I need to find the one person who can authorize that offshore transfer. I am going to find Vanessa's husband. I strode out of the airport security office, my boots clicking sharply against the polished tile. The cold Seattle morning air hit my face as I stepped up to the taxi stand, my mind already calculating the next move. Before tracking down Jamal, there was one loose end requiring my immediate attention. Diana. Mr. Harrison had mentioned the authorities were already mobilizing. Knowing my mother's survival instincts, I knew she would march straight to the police to strike an immunity deal after realizing Richard and Vanessa were fleeing without her. I gave the cab driver the address for the downtown police precinct. Inside the sterile, echoing halls of the precinct, I flashed my corporate investigator credentials. A detective briefed on my status as the primary victim escorted me down a narrow corridor. Through the two-way glass of an interrogation room, I saw her. Diana was weeping hysterically to a federal agent playing the role of a terrified, manipulated wife. I pushed the heavy door open. The agent gave a brief nod and stepped out, leaving us alone. Diana's head snapped up. Relief flooded her tear-streaked face. Clara, thank God you got my text. I tried to save you. Richard and Vanessa lost their minds. They tried to abandon me. Save it. I cut her off, my voice slicing through the air like a razor. I slammed my palms onto the metal table. You did not text me out of maternal love. You texted me because you found out they were moving the final $10 million to an offshore account and leaving you to take the fall for 19 years of federal conservatorship fraud. Diana shrank back, her performative tears instantly evaporating. You do not understand. I had to protect myself. I am your mother. And then you threw me away at 11 so you could live in a mansion built entirely on my dead father money. I stated, my eyes locked onto hers with zero sympathy. You called me to save yourself. I am not saving any of you. I am going to bury all three of you. Diana slid out of her chair, falling to her knees on the cold linoleum. She grasped desperately at the hem of my coat. Please, I sacrificed so much. You sacrificed me, I corrected, stepping back, so her hands grasped nothing but empty air. You taught me independence when you abandoned me. It is time you practice it. I turned on my heel and walked out, ignoring her pathetic sobbing. Stepping back into the gray Seattle drizzle, I pulled out my phone and accessed my secure database. I typed in Jamal's name. As a corporate compliance director, his daily schedule was highly predictable. It was early morning, and he would be arriving at his executive parking garage shortly. I climbed into my waiting cab. Vanguard Financial Headquarters, I instructed the driver. It was time to show Jamal exactly who he married. As the cab navigated the slick Seattle streets toward Vanguard Financial, my mind violently pulled me back to the events of just hours ago. The sheer magnitude of the truth was still burning through my veins. The transition from the police precinct to this cab ride felt like a blur, overshadowed by the memory of waking up in that private airport security office. When I had opened my eyes earlier that morning, the harsh fluorescent lights of the airport backroom had blinded me. I had gasped for air, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mr. Harrison, the trust and estate attorney, was sitting patiently across a metal table, a thick manila folder resting under his hands. He walked me through the paperwork with clinical precision, dismantling 19 years of psychological torture in mere minutes. He slid a certified birth certificate across the table. The name listed under father was not Richard. It was Alexander Wright. He was a brilliant technology entrepreneur who had died in a car accident when I was just a baby. He was my real biological father, and he had left me a protected trust fund currently valued at $45 million. I was never Richard's unwanted burden or a genetic disappointment. I was a multimillionaire heiress. But the revelation that truly stopped my breath was the twisted past they had engineered to steal it all. Mr. Harrison presented the old court documents, explaining how 19 years ago, Richard and Diana fabricated the entire stolen jewelry incident. They had deliberately planted that diamond necklace in my bedroom, called the authorities, and manufactured a fraudulent paper trail of severe juvenile delinquency. They shipped me off to that cheap, abusive, disciplinary boarding school for a highly specific legal reason. It allowed Richard to ruthlessly petition the family court for a conservatorship over a troubled and unmanageable youth. That single legal maneuver granted him unchecked, absolute access to drain my trust fund. Every brick of their sprawling suburban mansion, every designer handbag, every luxury car, Vanessa proudly drove, and Richard's entire fake self-made millionaire facade had been entirely funded by my dead father's money. They had meticulously monetized my suffering, throwing me away like garbage so they could live like absolute royalty. The cab jerked to a sudden halt outside the towering glass facade of Vanguard Financial, snapping me back to the present reality. The paralyzing shock I had felt in the airport security office was completely gone, now replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless fury. I paid the driver and stepped out onto the damp pavement, adjusting the heavy strap of my bag. I knew exactly how corporate thieves operated, and I knew exactly how they hid their tracks. Richard and Vanessa thought they had successfully drained my lifeblood, but they had made a fatal error in their desperate haste to move the final $10 million offshore. They needed a second signature. I walked toward the executive parking garage, my forensic audit files clutched tightly in my hand. Jamal was about to get the wake-up call of his life. I stood outside the executive parking garage of Vanguard Financial, the cold morning air biting at my cheeks. My hand was hovering over the heavy metal door handle, ready to pull it open and confront Jamal. Just as I shifted my weight forward, my phone vibrated violently in my coat pocket. I checked the illuminated screen, expecting a generic work email, but the caller ID flashed Mr. Harrison, the trust attorney I had just left at the airport. I answered immediately, keeping my voice hushed against the ambient city noise. "Clara, you need to redirect your route," Mr. Harrison said, his tone urgent and strictly professional. "The authorities just intercepted your mother." She is currently sitting in an interrogation room at the downtown police precinct, and she is completely hysterical. She is refusing to speak to the federal agents until she sees you. She claims she has critical information that will secure the remaining stolen assets, but she is attempting to leverage it for a full immunity deal. I released the cold door handle, taking a slow, calculated breath. Jamal and his forged signatures could wait another hour. My mother was trying to play her final desperate card, and I needed to be the one to rip it out of her hands. "Send me the precinct address," I told him, turning around and flagging down a passing taxi. I gave the driver the location and watched the gray Seattle skyline blur past the rain-slicked window. My forensic mind was already assembling the scattered pieces of Diana's sudden change of heart. She was a woman who only moved when her own survival was directly threatened. She did not have a maternal bone in her body. The cab pulled up to the imposing concrete structure of the police precinct. I walked through the sliding glass doors, flashing the temporary victim credential Mr. Harrison had digitally forwarded to my phone. A stern-faced detective met me in the lobby and escorted me silently down a narrow, heavily secured hallway, smelling of stale coffee and floor wax. We stopped outside a thick metal door with a small reinforced wire glass window. Through the glass I could see Diana. She looked absolutely nothing like the polished, arrogant woman who had sneered at me in the Aspen Steakhouse just yesterday. Her expensive designer cashmere sweater was severely wrinkled. Her premium makeup was smeared down her cheeks in dark, jagged streaks, and she was nervously tearing a paper coffee cup to absolute shreds. The detective opened the door and I stepped inside. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in the sterile gray room. Diana's head snapped up at the sound of the latch. The moment her eyes locked onto mine, she practically threw herself out of her bolted metal chair. "Clara," she sobbed loudly, rushing forward to grab my hands. "Thank God you got my text message. I tried to save you. I really did. I have been so incredibly terrified for you all night." I stood perfectly still, letting her cold, manicured fingers clutch at the fabric of my coat. I did not pull away, but I did not return the embrace. I just stared at her, letting the absolute silence stretch until her performative tears began to falter under my icy, unwavering gaze. "You have to believe me, Clara," she pleaded, her voice cracking with manufactured desperation. "Richard is a monster. He forced me to go along with the conservatorship scheme. He threatened to leave me with absolutely nothing if I did not cooperate with his legal maneuvers. I wanted to tell you the truth for years, but he kept me a prisoner in my own life." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling nothing but clinical detachment. I remembered the exact day she packed my bags for the disciplinary school. I remembered the cold, unapologetic indifference in her eyes when she told the county social worker I was an uncontrollable, violent thief. There was no coercion then. There was only unadulterated greed. "Save the pathetic performance, Diana," I said, my voice slicing through the stale air of the interrogation room like a surgical scalpel. I pulled my hands out of her desperate grasp and took a deliberate step back. "I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in tears, apologies, or fabricated victimhood. I deal in ledgers, bank timelines, and offshore wire transfers. Let us talk about why you actually sent that text message." Diana shrank back physically, retreating to her metal chair. Her eyes darted toward the two-way mirror nervously. I pulled out a printed summary of the trust audit Mr. Harrison had provided and tossed it onto the scarred metal table between us. "You did not text me out of maternal love," I stated, pacing slowly around the small, confined room. "You texted me because of a massive, glaring irregularity in Richard's recent banking activity. Yesterday afternoon, while I was being humiliated at dinner, Richard and Vanessa attempted to authorize a wire transfer of exactly $10 million. It was the final remaining liquid balance of my father trust fund. They tried to move it to a corporate shell account located in the Cayman Islands." Diana swallowed hard, her breathing turning shallow and erratic. She knew exactly where I was going with this deduction. "You discovered the offshore account late last night," I continued, leaning over the table to look her dead in the eye, forcing her to face her own reality. "You realized that Richard and Vanessa were planning to board a private jet straight out of Aspen today, but they were not taking you with them. The color completely drained from Diana's face, leaving her looking gray and hollow. "You figured it out," I said, delivering the fatal logical blow. "They were going to flee the jurisdiction with my $10 million and leave you completely stranded in the United States. You were not going to be enjoying cocktails on a tropical beach. You were going to be the sole remaining domestic signatory on 19 years of fraudulent federal tax returns and falsified conservatorship documents. They set you up to take the absolute fall for a massive federal crime while they lived like royalty in the Caribbean." Diana buried her face in her trembling hands, letting out a genuine, agonizing wail. It was the raw sound of a predator realizing it had been caught in its own trap. "They locked me out of the joint accounts," she confessed, her voice muffled by her shaking fingers. "Richard told me my card declined at the hotel bar because of a temporary fraud alert, but I logged into the banking portal from my phone and saw the accounts were entirely empty." Vanessa packed her passport in her ski bag. I saw it hidden in the side pocket. "They were going to leave me to the FBI. I warned you, Clara. I gave you the head start to run. You have to tell the federal agents to give me full immunity." I stood up straight, methodically adjusting the collar of my coat. I looked down at the pathetic, broken woman who had traded her own daughter for a suburban mansion and a country club membership. "You called me to save yourself," I said, my tone dropping to an absolute chilling calm. "You wanted to use me as a human shield against your own husband. But I am not saving any of you, Diana," I continued, letting every word hit like a hammer strike. "I am going to let the federal government seize every single asset you own. I am going to watch them strip away your house, your cars, and your entire fake life." I turned my back on her and walked toward the door, grasping the handle. "I am going to bury all three of you." I pushed the heavy metal door open, ignoring her desperate screaming behind me as she begged me to come back. I walked out of the precinct into the damp Seattle air, my vision perfectly clear. Now I was finally ready to visit Vanguard Financial. Jamal was waiting, and it was time to drop the next domino. I pushed the heavy metal door open, ignoring her desperate screaming behind me as she begged me to come back and save her. I walked out of the precinct into the damp Seattle air, my vision perfectly clear. Now I was finally ready to visit Vanguard Financial. Jamal was waiting, and it was time to drop the next domino. But as I raised my hand to flag down a passing taxi, a sudden wave of clinical precision washed over me. Going to Jamal empty-handed was a tactical error. Jamal was a compliance director. He dealt with risk management and corporate policy all day long. If a random woman approached him in a parking garage making wild accusations about federal tax fraud and offshore accounts, he would instantly call building security. He would not believe a word I said unless I handed him the indisputable mathematical proof I needed, the raw data I needed, the banking routing numbers, the forged tax filings, and the exact corporate structures Vanessa had built to launder my father money. Jamal could wait just another 2 hours. I needed my arsenal first. I redirected the taxi driver, giving him the address to my high-security apartment in downtown Seattle. It was a sleek, minimalist penthouse I had purchased entirely with the profits from my forensic accounting firm. Unlike Richard's sprawling suburban mansion, which was built on stolen funds and fake prestige, my home was a fortress built on absolute truth and relentless hard work. The building required biometric scans for elevator access, and my unit was equipped with enterprise-grade cybersecurity networks. It was my sanctuary and my command center. I unlocked the heavy, reinforced door and stepped inside, dropping my duffel bag in the entryway. I walked straight into my private home office. The room was dominated by a massive curved desk featuring 4 high-resolution monitors, a secure local server, and a dedicated encrypted fiber optic connection. This was where I tore apart corrupt corporations and unraveled complex embezzlement schemes. Today, I was going to use it to perform an autopsy on my own family. I powered on the workstation, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. With practice speed, I logged into my encrypted communication portal and pulled the raw audit files the attorney had securely transferred to my server. The moment the spreadsheets populated across my monitors, the lingering emotional weight of Diana's pathetic crying vanished entirely. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not manipulate gaslight or abandon you alone at an airport. Numbers told a perfect chronological story of human greed. I initiated a deep forensic trace on the $10 million wire transfer Richard and Vanessa had attempted to push through to the Cayman Islands. My custom tracking software mapped the digital footprint, tearing through the layers of obfuscation they had amateurishly set up. I watched the screen as the algorithm unspooled their crude corporate structure. They had created a shell company to funnel the remaining liquid assets from my conservatorship, disguising the theft as high-yield real estate investments. But Richard and Vanessa were arrogant, and arrogance always breeds carelessness. In their desperate rush to secure the final $10 million, they had triggered an automated banking safeguard. International wire transfers of that magnitude, originating from joint holding accounts, required dual authorization. Richard had designated Vanessa as the primary financial officer of the shell company, but to legitimize the corporate structure to the federal government, Vanessa had listed her husband Jamal as the secondary executive officer. She needed his signature to authorize the final offshore clearance. I pulled up the corporate filing documents, zooming in on the signature lines. There was Vanessa Lupi, pretentious handwriting right next to a sharp, angular signature that supposedly belonged to Jamal. I opened a secondary window, running a quick background check on Jamal. He was a highly respected African-American professional who had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer merit and absolute integrity. His pristine credit score and immaculate professional record made him the perfect unwitting shield for international money laundering. Vanessa had used his name to bypass federal scrutiny. I downloaded several publicly available documents containing Jamal's actual verified signature from his corporate filings at Vanguard Financial. I ran a comparative biometric overlay using my forensic software. The final result flashed on my screen in bright red. The signature on the Cayman Islands wire authorization was a perfect match for a manual forgery. Vanessa had forged her own husband's signature, committing severe identity theft and dragging an innocent man into a massive federal crime. A cold smile touched the corners of my mouth. Vanessa thought she was a criminal mastermind, but she was just a spoiled child playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. If the FBI caught wind of this wire transfer, Jamal would lose his compliance license, his executive position, and potentially his freedom. His entire life would be absolutely destroyed because he had the misfortune of marrying into a family of parasites. I knew exactly what I had to do. I highlighted the forged signatures, the offshore routing numbers, and the fake tax filings. I hit the print command. The heavy laser printer hummed to life, spitting out page after page of undeniable condemning evidence. I carefully gathered the pages, assembling a 50-page dossier that contained the entire anatomy of their criminal enterprise. I bound the pages together with a heavy metal clip, feeling the satisfying weight of the weapon I had just forged. I grabbed the dossier from the desk and walked out of my apartment, locking the reinforced door behind me. I rode the elevator down to the underground parking garage, my mind completely clear. I climbed into my sedan and started the engine, pulling out into the damp streets of Seattle, heading straight for the towering glass facade of Vanguard Financial. Jamal was sitting in his office, oblivious. It was time to introduce myself and light the match. I sat in the ergonomic chair at my workstation, the glow of 4 monitors casting a pale blue light across my face. The emotional whiplash of the last few hours was gone, replaced by the icy focus that made me one of the most feared forensic accountants in the city. I cracked my knuckles and went to work on the files Mr. Harrison had provided. I needed to understand exactly how Richard and Vanessa had structured their embezzlement empire. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up public records, cross-referencing shell company registrations, and digging into IRS filings. It was a fast-paced digital autopsy. The structure they had built was amateurish but effective, relying heavily on Richard's position as my conservator to legitimize the initial transfers. They had set up a web of limited liability companies, using them to purchase real estate, luxury vehicles, and high-yield investments, all funded by my father trust. I tracked the money, mapping the flow of assets through the various shell corporations. The paper trail was extensive and damning, but I needed the smoking gun. I needed to understand the mechanics of the final $10 million offshore transfer that had triggered Diana. Panic. I zeroed in on the holding company Richard and Vanessa had recently established specifically to funnel the remaining liquid assets to the Cayman Islands. I pulled up the corporate charter and the banking authorization documents. My eyes scanned the legalese, searching for the bottleneck. Every complex financial maneuver had a weak point, a single point of failure. I just had to find it. And then I saw it. A glaring oversight in their desperate rush to secure the funds. The holding company account was structured to require dual authorization for international wire transfers exceeding $1 million. Vanessa was listed as the primary financial officer, granting her access to initiate the transfer. But she could not finalize it alone. She needed a secondary signature. I scrolled down to the executive officer listings, expecting to see Richard's name. Instead, the secondary signatory was listed as Jamal Vance, Vanessa husband. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Richard and Vanessa had deliberately structured the holding company to insulate Richard from direct involvement in the offshore transfer. They were using Jamal as a shield, dragging him into a massive federal crime without his knowledge. I knew Jamal only by reputation. My family had actively kept us apart, feeding him the narrative that I was a dangerous, unstable dropout. I had seen him at a distance during a few forced family gatherings, a sharp, intelligent man who carried himself with quiet authority. He was a compliance director at Vanguard Financial, a position that required absolute ethical integrity. Why would Vanessa risk her husband's career and freedom? I dug deeper into the filings, pulling up the signature authorization cards submitted to the bank. There was Vanessa's signature, loopy and arrogant. Right next to it was a sharp, angular signature that supposedly belonged to Jamal. I opened a secondary window and ran a search for publicly available documents containing Jamal-verified signature from his corporate filings at Vanguard Financial. I ran a comparative biometric overlay using my forensic software. The algorithm analyzed the stroke patterns, the pressure points, the angle of the curves. The result flashed on my screen in bright red. A 99% match for a manual forgery. Vanessa had forged her own husband's signature. She had committed severe identity theft to bypass the dual authorization requirement. This was the fatal flaw in their plan. The offshore transfer was currently pending final clearance from the bank compliance department because of the size and destination of the funds. They were verifying the signatures. If they flagged the forgery, the transfer would be blocked, and the FBI would be notified immediately. But I did not want the bank to stop the transfer. I wanted Jamal to stop it. I wanted him to see exactly who he married, and I wanted to use his corporate authority to lock down the entire fraudulent empire. Richard and Vanessa thought they were outsmarting everyone, but they had just handed me the perfect weapon. I highlighted the forged signatures, the offshore routing numbers, and the fake tax filings. I hit the print command. The heavy laser printer hummed to life, spitting out page after page of undeniable condemning evidence. I carefully gathered the pages, assembling a 50-page dossier that contained the entire anatomy of their criminal enterprise. I bound the pages together with a heavy metal clip, feeling the satisfying weight of the weapon I had just forged. I grabbed the dossier from the desk and walked out of my apartment, locking the reinforced door behind me. I rode the elevator down to the underground parking garage, my mind completely clear. I climbed into my sedan and started the engine, pulling out into the damp streets of Seattle, heading straight for the towering glass facade of Vanguard Financial. I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on Jamal Vance's perfect life, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. The drive to Vanguard Financial felt entirely too short. The adrenaline pumping through my system made every second stretch, yet time simultaneously vanished. I pulled into the underground executive parking structure, scanning the dimly lit concrete cavern. My custom tracking software had pulled Jamal's exact vehicle registration and assigned parking space. I spotted it instantly, a sleek, immaculate dark blue Mercedes sedan parked in spot 32. I parked a few spaces away, killed the engine, and grabbed the heavy 50-page dossier from the passenger seat. I stepped out of my car, the damp air of the garage clinging to my skin. I leaned against the concrete pillar adjacent to Jamal's spot, waiting. I did not have to wait long. 5 minutes later, the distinct sound of confident, rhythmic footsteps echoed through the cavernous garage. Jamal Vance appeared walking toward his car. He was exactly as I remembered from forced brief encounters at awkward family events years ago, a tall, imposing man with a meticulously groomed beard, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that screamed corporate authority. He moved with the precise, measured confidence of a man who dealt in high-stakes risk management and absolute compliance. He unlocked his Mercedes, the headlights flashing briefly, illuminating the concrete. As he reached for the door handle, I stepped out from behind the pillar blocking his path. Jamal. He froze, his hand hovering inches from the door handle. His dark eyes darted toward me, assessing the potential threat. The confusion on his face lasted only a fraction of a second before a cold, defensive wall slammed down. He recognized me. The recognition was not warm. It was laced with suspicion and an underlying tension. "Clara," he said, his voice low and carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa had done her job well. I could see the narrative she had carefully constructed playing out in his mind. The delusional, jealous dropout sister showing up uninvited, looking for a handout or causing a scene. "We need to talk," I said, taking a deliberate step forward. "It is urgent." Jamal's posture stiffened, his shoulders squaring. He subtly shifted his weight, preparing to either de-escalate a crazy person or call for security. "I do not think so, Clara. Vanessa told me you were back in town. She also told me about the scene you caused at the airport. I am not interested in getting involved in your family drama. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Please step aside." He reached for the door handle again, completely dismissing me. He genuinely believed he was dealing with a frantic, unstable relative. He believed his wife. He believed her family built their wealth through hard work and savvy investments. He was a good man trapped in a web of parasitic lies. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or plead. I simply raised the heavy-bound 50-page audit dossier and slammed it down onto the pristine hood of his Mercedes. The metallic thud echoed loudly through the concrete garage. Jamal flinched, stepping back, his eyes flashing with sudden anger. "What the hell is your problem?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Read it," I commanded, my voice dropping to an icy, terrifying calm. I locked my eyes onto his, refusing to blink. "Your wife is about to make you an accessory to a $45 million federal crime." The anger drained from his face, replaced by a stark, intense confusion. He looked down at the thick stack of papers on his hood, then back up at me. "What are you talking about?" "I am a forensic accountant, Jamal." I stated, my tone entirely clinical. "I tear apart fraudulent corporations for a living. What you are looking at is a complete audit of 19 years of federal conservatorship fraud committed by Richard and Vanessa. They have been systematically draining a $45 million trust fund left to me by my biological father." Jamal shook his head, a dismissive scoff escaping his lips. "You are out of your mind. Richard built that real estate portfolio from scratch. Vanessa manages the holding company. It is legitimate. It is a shell game," I fired back, taking another step closer. "And they just made a fatal error. Yesterday afternoon, they attempted to wire the final $10 million of my trust to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. They are planning to flee the country and leave my mother to take the fall." Jamal crossed his arms, his defensive posture returning. "Even if any of this insane conspiracy theory were true, what does it have to do with me?" I tapped the dossier on the hood of his car, my finger resting directly over a highlighted section. "That offshore holding company requires dual authorization for transfers over $1 million. Vanessa is the primary financial officer. Do you want to guess who is listed as the secondary executive officer?" Jamal frowned, his eyes narrowing. "What are you implying?" "I am not implying anything, Jamal. I am stating a forensic fact." I flipped the dossier open to the corporate filings, displaying the signature authorization cards. "Look at the secondary signature line." Jamal leaned over the hood, his eyes scanning the document. He froze. The color slowly leached from his face. He stared at the sharp, angular signature next to Vanessa Loopy handwriting. "That is my signature," he whispered, his voice suddenly hollow. "But I never signed this. I have never seen this document in my life." "I know," I said softly, the icy edge in my voice melting away. "Because Vanessa forged it. She committed severe identity theft using your pristine corporate compliance record to bypass federal banking scrutiny. She dragged you into a massive international money laundering scheme without your knowledge." Jamal stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the forged signature. The meticulously constructed reality of his marriage, his life, his entire ethical foundation was shattering right in front of him. The golden child wife he believed was a savvy business manager was a ruthless corporate thief. "The transfer is currently pending final clearance from bank compliance." I continued laying out the brutal timeline. "They are verifying the signatures. If they flag the forgery, the transfer fails and the FBI gets notified. You lose your license, your executive position, and potentially your freedom because you are officially listed as a co-conspirator." He looked up at me, the devastating realization fully settling in his eyes. "We have less than 48 hours, I said, my voice hardening into a tactical command. "Richard and Vanessa think they are boarding a private jet out of Aspen tomorrow. We are going to stop them. But I need your help. Are you going to let them destroy your life, or are you going to help me burn them to the ground?" Jamal did not speak immediately. The silence in the underground garage stretched heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of traffic above us. He reached out with terrifyingly steady hands and picked up the dossier from the hood of his car. The polished executive, the man who had just told me to step aside, was gone. In his place was the Vanguard Financial Compliance Director, a predator in his own right, encountering a fatal breach in his own system. He began to flip through the pages. I watched his eyes track the data. He was not just reading, he was auditing in real time. He saw the offshore routing numbers. He recognized the specific SWIFT codes associated with Cayman Island tax havens. He paused on the IRS filings, his finger tracing the fraudulent declarations of capital gains that Vanessa had seamlessly woven into their joint tax returns. "These routing numbers," Jamal murmured, his voice stripped of all emotion. "She bypassed the standard anti-money laundering triggers by structuring the deposits just under the federal reporting thresholds." Smurfing. "My wife has been smurfing stolen funds for over a decade." "She had excellent tutors," I replied. "Richard laid the groundwork, but Vanessa modernized it. She needed a legitimate corporate executive to co-sign the holding company, to give it the illusion of institutional backing. Your pristine record was her golden ticket." Jamal turned back to the signature authorization card. He stared at his own forged handwriting. I could physically see the realization washing over him, dismantling every memory, every anniversary, every tender moment he thought he shared with her. His entire marriage was not a partnership. It was a calculated financial shield. The expensive dinners with Richard, the lavish vacations, the perfectly curated suburban life they portrayed to the world were all funded by my stolen inheritance. He had been selected, vetted, and utilized as a human firewall for a massive international money laundering operation. He was nothing but a prop in their grand illusion. He closed the dossier. The loud snap of the heavy paper echoed off the concrete walls. When he looked up at me, the confusion and denial were completely gone. His dark eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with an absolute terrifying fury. It was the look of a man who had dedicated his life to ethics and compliance, only to realize he had been sleeping next to a corporate thief. "If I report this to my board right now," Jamal said, his mind already executing risk management protocols, "I am legally obligated to freeze my own assets pending a federal investigation. They will suspend my license. Even if I am cleared, the stain of an SEC inquiry will end my career. Vanguard Financial does not tolerate proximity to scandal." "If you report it now, Richard and Vanessa will panic," I added. "They will liquidate whatever they can, move it into untraceable cryptocurrency, and vanish before the feds even draft the subpoenas. We lose the money, and you lose your reputation." Jamal gripped the edge of the dossier. You said they are attempting to clear the final $10 million right now. The bank compliance department put a 48-hour hold on the transfer I confirmed. They are verifying the signatures. Because of the size of the wire and the destination, they will likely require verbal authorization from both signatories. Vanessa cannot approve it alone. Jamal's jaw tightened. She is going to try to intercept the bank verification call. She probably set up a burner phone routing through my office number so it looks legitimate on the bank caller ID logs. She has been planning this exit strategy right under my nose. She thinks she has all the angles covered, I said. She thinks I am just a terrified runaway, and she thinks you are a clueless husband sitting in your glass tower. She does not know we are standing in this garage together. How long do we have exactly? He demanded. Their private jet is scheduled to take off from Aspen tomorrow afternoon. Once they are airborne and that transfer clears, they are untouchable. We have less than 48 hours to trap them. Jamal stepped away from his Mercedes and paced a short circle around the concrete pillar. I stayed perfectly still, letting him process the magnitude of the betrayal. He was a man accustomed to total control, and his wife had stripped him of all of it. He needed a moment to grieve the illusion of his life before he could help me destroy it. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. The raw anger in his posture had settled into a lethal, focused weapon. He was no longer the defensive husband protecting his family honor. He was a compliance director preparing to execute a hostile corporate takeover. Vanessa used my integrity to build her safety net, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. She thought she could leverage my career to steal your father's legacy and leave you both in the dirt. He walked back over to me and held out his hand. Not to dismiss me, but to seal a pact. You have the forensic data, Jamal said. But I have the corporate authority. As the secondary executive officer of that shell company, I have the legal right to freeze every single transaction, lock down the accounts, and trigger an immediate internal audit without alerting Richard or Vanessa. I looked at his outstretched hand. This was the turning point. I had spent my entire life fighting this battle entirely alone. Now I had a partner on the inside. I reached out and shook his hand, his grip firm and resolute. We are not just going to freeze the accounts, I told him. We are going to let them believe the transfer is successful. We are going to let them walk right up to that private jet thinking they have won. A dark, knowing smile touched the corners of Jamal's mouth. We trap them at the finish line. We let them commit fully to the flight, and then we sever their financial lifeline while they are standing on the tarmac. Exactly, I said. But to do that, I need to go back into the lion den. I need to fly back to Aspen and play the broken gaslit daughter one last time. I need to keep Richard and Vanessa completely distracted while you dismantle their empire from Seattle. They will humiliate you, Jamal warned. Vanessa is ruthless when she thinks she has the upper hand. Let her be ruthless, I replied, grabbing the dossier from him and sliding it back into my bag. I have survived 19 years of her cruelty. I can survive 24 more hours. You just make sure that when Richard hands his black card to the aviation desk tomorrow, it declines. I will personally ensure their net worth is exactly zero, Jamal promised. I am going to call my legal team and prepare the federal injunctions. I will draft the divorce papers while I am at it. We stood in the dim light of the parking garage, two people brought together by the staggering greed of the family that had betrayed us both. We had an ironclad pact. We had less than 48 hours, and we were going to burn them to the ground. We left the echoing concrete of the Vanguard Financial parking garage and relocated to a 24-hour diner a few blocks away. The neon lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare over the cracked vinyl booth as I spread the audit files across the sticky tabletop. We needed a secure, neutral location to map out the exact sequence of the trap. Jamal ordered black coffee and immediately pulled out his tablet, syncing it with my encrypted server. The initial shock had entirely left his system, replaced by the lethal efficiency of a corporate compliance executive preparing for a hostile takedown. If we just call the Seattle police or the FBI right now, we risk losing everything, Jamal said, his eyes scanning the offshore routing numbers. Richard is arrogant, but he is not stupid. The moment he gets wind of an active federal investigation, he will panic. He will cancel the wire transfer and liquidate the trust into untraceable cryptocurrency or scatter it across a dozen decentralized international black holes. We will be chasing ghosts for the next decade. Exactly, I agreed, tracing a line connecting the shell company to the Cayman Islands account. We cannot spook them. We need them to feel absolutely invincible. We need Richard to believe he has successfully executed the final wire transfer. If we catch him in the physical act of initiating the flight while the funds are locked in transit, the FBI gets a neat, perfect package of undeniable federal wire fraud. But to make them feel invincible, they need their favorite punching bag back in the room. Jamal looked up from his screen, his dark eyes studying my face. You are going back to Aspen. I nodded, taking a sip of the bitter diner coffee. I am booking the next flight out. I will walk back into that luxury resort and play the exact role they expect me to play. I will tell them I had a minor panic attack last night, that the altitude and the family tension overwhelmed me, and that I took a car to a nearby motel to calm down. I will apologize for ruining the evening. I will lower my head, swallow my pride, and be the submissive, gaslit scapegoat one last time. It is the perfect Trojan horse strategy because my pathetic obedience is the only narrative their massive egos will actually accept. Jamal's jaw tightened. Vanessa is going to be brutal, Clara. If she thinks you broke down, she will use it to humiliate you further. She will try to break whatever confidence you have left. Let her try. I said, my voice steady and cold. Her cruelty is her ultimate blind spot. While she is busy mocking my fake panic attack, she will not notice the federal noose tightening around her own neck. We finalized the timeline. Jamal would stay in Seattle, barricaded in his office. He was going to mobilize his elite corporate legal team under the guise of an emergency internal audit. He would prepare the federal injunctions, draft the absolute freeze orders on all of Vanessa's domestic assets, and quietly push the divorce papers through his private attorney. He had exactly 24 hours to build a legal cage so tight that neither Richard nor Vanessa would ever see daylight again. I left Jamal at the diner and headed straight back to the airport. The flight to Aspen felt entirely different this time. I was no longer a terrified woman running from a mysterious threat. I was a specialized weapon flying directly toward my target. I used the 2-hour flight to mentally prepare myself, shutting away the forensic accountant and resurrecting the timid, anxious daughter they had created. It was a psychological suit of armor. I messed up my hair, slightly rubbed at my eyes until they looked red and bloodshot, and practiced the slight nervous tremble in my hands. When the plane touched down in the freezing Colorado air, I bypassed the luxury ride shares and took a standard shuttle bus back to the resort. I wanted to look exhausted and thoroughly defeated. The towering timber framing of the Aspen Lodge loomed ahead of me like a giant wooden cage. I pulled my heavy winter coat tighter around my shoulders, taking one final deep breath of the crisp mountain air before walking through the automatic glass doors. The lobby was bustling with wealthy tourists returning from the ski slopes, but I spotted them immediately. Richard and Vanessa were lounging in a private alcove near the massive stone fireplace, sipping hot toddies and laughing. They looked completely unbothered by my sudden disappearance the night before. They were probably celebrating the fact that I was gone. I forced my shoulders to slump and walked slowly toward their alcove, clutching my duffel bag like a physical shield. Vanessa saw me first. The laughter died on her lips, instantly replaced by a look of profound annoyance. She nudged Richard, who turned around and let out a loud, dramatic groan. "Look what the cat dragged in," Vanessa sneered, setting her crystal mug down on the polished wood table. "We were just taking bets on whether you had finally run off to join a circus, Clara. Where have you been?" I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, forcing my voice to shake perfectly. "I am so sorry," I whispered, gripping the strap of my bag. "I had a severe panic attack last night. The altitude and the restaurant crowd just overwhelmed me. I took a shuttle to a cheap motel down the mountain to try and calm my nerves. I was too embarrassed to call. I am so incredibly sorry for ruining the dinner." Richard scoffed, shaking his head in absolute disgust. "You are 32 years old, Clara, and you are still throwing childish tantrums. You are a constant embarrassment to this family. We were preparing to leave tomorrow, and you pull this pathetic stunt." You are lucky I do not make you sleep in the lobby. I know, I mumbled, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. Please just let me make it up to you tonight. I will pay for whatever you want. I just want to be part of the family. Vanessa exchanged a triumphant look with Richard. The absolute superiority in her eyes was sickening. She thoroughly enjoyed watching me beg. She believed she had won. She believed I was broken. Fine, Vanessa sighed, waving her hand dismissively. Go clean yourself up. You look like a homeless person. We have dinner reservations at the Summit restaurant in 2 hours. Do not be late and bring your credit card. We are drinking the expensive champagne tonight. I nodded submissively, keeping my head bowed as I backed away from the alcove. Thank you, I murmured, turning toward the elevators. The moment my back was to them, the nervous tremble in my hands vanished completely. The pathetic slump of my shoulders disappeared, replaced by a spine of absolute steel. I walked into the elevator and watched the doors slide shut, isolating me in the mirrored cabin. I looked at my reflection and smiled a cold, ruthless smile. The Trojan horse was officially inside the gates. The trap was set and they had walked right into it. I arranged my face into a mask of exhausted contrition before stepping out of the elevator. The Summit restaurant at the top of the resort was a sprawling architectural marvel of exposed beams and panoramic glass, offering a breathtaking view of the snow-covered peaks. But the view inside was far less appealing. Richard and Vanessa were already seated at a prime corner table surrounded by empty cocktail glasses and an open bottle of vintage champagne. They looked like royalty holding court, their laughter cutting through the ambient hum of the dining room. I approached the table with my head slightly bowed, my posture radiating defeat. I slipped into the empty chair opposite them, clutching my purse tightly. Neither of them stopped talking immediately. They let me sit there for a full minute, ensuring I felt the absolute weight of their disregard. Well, Vanessa finally drawled, her eyes sliding over me with undisguised contempt. The prodigal daughter returns. Did you enjoy your little temper tantrum at the Motel 6, Clara? Did they leave a mint on the pillow for you? I am sorry, I murmured, keeping my voice low and unsteady. I panicked. The altitude was getting to me and I just needed to lie down. It was stupid to leave, I know. Richard let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. Stupid is an understatement. It was a pathetic display of emotional fragility. You are a 32-year-old woman, Clara, acting like a hysterical teenager. You ruined the entire evening yesterday. We had to explain to the concierge that our daughter was having an episode. I felt my phone vibrating against my thigh, recording every single word. I kept my hands folded in my lap, burying my nails into my palms to maintain the facade. I know, I said, forcing a slight tremor into my voice. I overreacted. I just want to make it up to you. I will pay for everything tonight. Vanessa smirked, lifting her champagne flute. Oh, you definitely are. And tomorrow you are paying for my new ski gear too. Consider it an apology tax. I nodded submissively, staring down at the pristine white tablecloth. The waiter arrived, and I ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, along with another bottle of champagne for the table. I ate in silence, letting their toxic banter wash over me. They complained about the service, they mocked the other guests, and they relentlessly belittled my career. I do not know why you even bother with that accounting nonsense, Vanessa scoffed, waving her fork dismissively. You work ridiculous hours just to look at spreadsheets all day. You should ask Dad to get you a job in real estate. At least then you might actually make some decent money. Richard chuckled, leaning back in his plush leather chair. I am not sure she has the personality for real estate, Vanessa. It requires charm and negotiation skills. Clara is better suited for hiding in a cubicle. I sliced a piece of steak, chewing slowly. Every insult they hurled was another nail in their respective coffins. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they could not see the predator sitting right across from them. I was not hiding in a cubicle, I was meticulously dismantling their entire fraudulent existence. As the waiter cleared our plates and poured the last of the champagne, Richard reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a thick folded stack of papers and dropped them onto the table, sliding them across the linen toward me. Since you are so eager to make up for yesterday, he said, his tone shifting to something dangerously casual. I went ahead and booked us a private guided tour of the extreme back bowls for tomorrow morning. It is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, Clara. But the resort requires all participants to sign a medical liability release, given the risks involved. I stared at the thick stack of papers. A standard medical release form was usually a single page. This document was at least 10 pages long, dense with legal jargon and tiny print. My forensic instincts flared instantly. This was it. This was the trap. I picked up the papers, my hands deliberately shaking slightly. "Wow, that sounds intense," I murmured, pretending to be intimidated. "Do we all have to sign this?" "Yes," Richard lied smoothly. "Vanessa and I already signed ours at the concierge desk. Just sign at the bottom of the last page, Clara. We need to submit it tonight to secure the guide." I flipped to the last page. There were 3 signature lines. The first 2 were already signed by Richard and Vanessa. The third was blank, waiting for my name. But I did not just look at the signature page. I quickly and subtly scanned the preceding pages, hiding my intense focus behind a mask of nervous hesitation. My eyes caught the specific legal phrasing buried in the dense paragraphs. It was not a medical release form. It was an irrevocable power of attorney, granting Richard absolute and total control over all my financial assets and legal decisions. And hidden in an addendum on page 8 was a specific authorization for the immediate liquidation and transfer of the remaining trust funds to an offshore holding company. They were not just trying to steal the money, they were trying to legally erase my ability to fight back. If I signed this document, they could drain the trust, move the funds to the Caymans, and leave me with absolutely no legal recourse. They were using my manufactured history of mental instability to justify seizing control of my life. "Sign the paper, Clara." Vanessa snapped, her patience wearing thin. "Stop stalling. We want to go back to the bar." I looked down at the signature line. The trap was perfectly laid out. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought my pathetic desire for their approval would make me sign blindly. They had no idea I was the one holding the pen, and I was about to rewrite the entire ending of their story. I picked up the heavy silver pen resting beside the dinner bill. The cool metal felt grounding against my warm palm. I let my hand hover over the dotted line, injecting just the right amount of manufactured hesitation into my posture. I looked up at Richard. He was watching me with the predatory intensity of a hawk about to strike a rabbit. A smug, arrogant smirk played on his lips. He truly believed I was too stupid, too desperate for his validation to read the fine print. He thought I was signing away my entire $45 million existence for a morning of extreme skiing. Vanessa tapped her manicured nails impatiently against the stem of her champagne flute. "Just sign it, Clara," she snapped. "Do not make this into another dramatic production. We are tired and we want to leave." I lowered my eyes, playing the obedient broken daughter. "Okay," I whispered softly. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly across the page as I signed my full legal name. Every letter I wrote felt like a deliberate strike against their empire. I knew exactly what this document was. I knew it was a fraudulent power of attorney designed to authorize the final offshore wire transfer. But I also knew this piece of paper was already mathematically and legally worthless because of what was happening 2,000 miles away. While I was sitting in that extravagant Aspen restaurant signing a fraudulent contract, a completely different kind of justice was being executed in Seattle. Jamal Vance was not hiding in a cubicle. He was walking through the heavy oak doors of a federal judge's private chambers. Jamal wore a dark tailored suit, his presence commanding absolute respect. As a highly decorated African-American compliance director at a major financial firm, he possessed the exact type of flawless corporate authority that judges listen to without question. He was accompanied by 2 senior litigators from his private legal team. The federal judge, a stern man accustomed to handling complex corporate disputes, looked over the thick dossier Jamal placed on his massive mahogany desk. This was the exact same 50-page forensic audit I had slammed onto the hood of Jamal Mercedes just 24 hours ago. "My wife forged my signature on federal banking documents," Jamal stated, his voice echoing with cold, unyielding integrity. She used my corporate compliance credentials to bypass dual authorization safeguards on an international wire transfer. She and her stepfather are currently attempting to launder $10 million through a shell company into the Cayman Islands. The judge opened the dossier. He reviewed the corporate charter documents, the offshore routing numbers, and the fake tax filings. Then he turned to the biometric signature analysis. The evidence was irrefutable. The sharp, angular signature on the bank authorization card was a crude mechanical forgery of Jamal's actual handwriting. Vanessa had committed severe identity theft, dragging an innocent corporate executive into a massive federal crime. Because Vanessa had illegally bound Jamal to the shell company, he possessed the absolute legal standing to destroy it from the inside. He did not need to wait for a lengthy FBI investigation or a grand jury subpoena. He was a listed executive officer, and he was blowing the whistle on his own compromised accounts. I am filing an emergency petition for an absolute freeze on all assets associated with these entities, Jamal told the judge. I am requesting an immediate halt on the pending $10 million wire transfer and a total lockdown of every domestic and international account linked to Vanessa and Richard. They are a severe flight risk, currently located in Aspen, Colorado, and preparing to leave the country tomorrow. The judge did not hesitate. He recognized a catastrophic federal crime in progress. He picked up his own pen and signed the emergency injunction. With a single stroke of ink, the judge triggered a digital avalanche. The court order was instantly transmitted to the Federal Banking Commission and the primary financial institutions holding Richard and Vanessa wealth. Within seconds, algorithms executed the freeze. Every routing number, every offshore shell company, every joint checking account, and every hidden reserve was locked down in an impenetrable digital vault. The money was trapped, the exit strategy was destroyed, their net worth plummeted to absolute zero before the ink on the judge order even dried. Back in Aspen, the dining room was filled with the clinking of crystal and the low hum of wealthy tourists. I capped the silver pen. I slid the thick stack of papers back across the crisp white linen tablecloth toward Richard. "Here you go," I said, keeping my voice quiet and submissive. I signed it. Richard snatched the document with greedy lightning speed. He immediately flipped to the final page, verifying my signature. The smug smirk on his face expanded into a wide, triumphant grin. He folded the heavy document and tucked it securely into the inner pocket of his expensive suit jacket, patting it twice as if calming a victorious heartbeat. "Good girl," he said, his tone dripping with condescending approval. "See how easy things are when you just do what you are told. Now go back to your cheap motel, Clara. We will see you in the morning for the ski trip. Do not be late." I stood up from the table, picking up my purse. I looked at Richard and Vanessa. They were already signaling the waiter to order another round of vintage champagne, celebrating their ultimate victory. They believed they had just secured $45 million and a one-way ticket to a tropical tax haven. They had no idea their bank accounts were currently frozen solid by a federal mandate. They had no idea Jamal had already severed their financial lifeline. "I will see you tomorrow," I replied. I smiled softly, a genuine, relaxed smile that they entirely misinterpreted as pathetic relief. I turned and walked out of the Summit restaurant, leaving them to drink their expensive champagne. The Trojan horse was empty. The legal cage was locked. The trap was completely armed. I woke up 2 hours before dawn. I had not slept a single minute. The crisp mountain air biting through the cracked window of my rental SUV kept me sharply focused. I was parked discreetly behind a grove of snow-heavy pines with a perfect unobstructed view of Richard and Vanessa luxury chalet. They had told me to meet them at the ski lift at 8 in the morning for our supposed family excursion. But corporate rats always flee in the dark. At precisely 5:15, the heavy oak front door of the chalet swung open. Richard emerged first, wrestling with 2 massive designer suitcases. Vanessa followed closely behind, her face buried in the thick fur collar of a pristine white coat. They moved with a hurried, frantic energy completely devoid of their usual arrogant swagger. They loaded their luggage into a waiting black town car. They did not leave a note. They did not check to see if I was waiting at the lobby. They simply packed up and abandoned me, just like they had abandoned Diana. The town car pulled away, its tires crunching loudly over the fresh powder. I shifted my SUV into gear and followed them, keeping a safe distance. The winding mountain roads were treacherous, slick with black ice and shrouded in thick morning fog. I navigated the dangerous curves with cold mechanical precision, keeping the red tail lights of their vehicle in my line of sight. I tapped the Bluetooth earpiece secured in my right ear, opening an encrypted communication channel. Jamal. I said, my eyes locked on the road ahead of me. The targets are on the move. They just left the resort and are heading straight for the private airstrip. Jamal's voice came through the earpiece, crisp and completely devoid of fatigue. I copy that, Clara. We are already on site. I flew in on a government charter 3 hours ago. The FBI White-Collar Crime Division is locked down inside the terminal manager office. We have federal agents stationed at all hangar exits and a tactical team waiting in the maintenance bay. The airstrip is completely secured. Nobody is flying to the Cayman Islands today. I accelerated slightly, maintaining the gap between my SUV and their town car. Has the bank flagged the wire transfer yet? I asked, navigating a sharp hairpin turn that overlooked the dark valley below. They hit the block at midnight. Jamal confirmed, his tone radiating absolute corporate authority. The federal injunction cleared immediately. The funds are officially suspended in a secure federal holding account. Richard and Vanessa currently possess a combined net worth of absolute zero. Every credit card, every checking account, and every hidden reserve is frozen solid. They just do not know it yet. The drive down the mountain felt like a slow, methodical countdown. The thick fog began to lift as we approached the Aspen Private Aviation Terminal. It was an exclusive, discreet facility designed specifically for billionaires who valued anonymity over public scrutiny. The black town car pulled up to the sleek glass entrance. I parked my SUV 100 yards away, slipping into an empty spot behind a row of catering vans. I kept the engine running and watched through the windshield. Richard and Vanessa stepped out of the car. All the frantic, nervous energy they displayed at the chalet had completely evaporated. They were back in their element, surrounded by polished glass and private jets waiting on the frosted tarmac. The valet rushed forward to load their designer luggage onto a brass cart. Richard handed the man a crisp $100 bill, tipping him with stolen money that no longer existed. Vanessa looped her arm through Richard's elbow, leaning into him. Even from 100 yards away, I could see the absolute elation radiating from her posture. She threw her head back and laughed at something Richard said. They were celebrating. They genuinely believed they had executed the perfect crime. They walked through the automatic glass doors, striding into the VIP terminal like conquering royalty. They thought they had secured $45 million. They thought they had successfully framed Diana for 19 years of federal conservatorship fraud. They thought they had left the broken, ugly duckling daughter stranded in the snow to deal with the devastating fallout. They were utterly, entirely oblivious to the lethal trap waiting for them on the other side of that glass. I turned off the ignition of my rental SUV. The heater died, leaving me in the rapidly cooling cabin. I did not feel the cold. I unbuckled my seatbelt and grabbed my leather briefcase from the passenger seat. The briefcase contained the physical copies of the federal injunctions, the forged signature analysis, and the offshore routing audits. It was the final nail in their coffin. I stepped out of the vehicle, my boots hitting the icy pavement with deliberate force. Jamal spoke through the earpiece again, breaking the quiet morning silence. They just approached the aviation desk, Clara. The terminal manager is stalling them exactly as we instructed. He is asking for their final fueling payment and runway clearance fee. They are taking the bait. I am walking in now, I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Hold the federal agents back until I give the signal. I want to see his face when the car declines. I want to look them in the eye when their entire world collapses. Understood, Jamal said. We are holding position in the back office. Give them hell, Clara. I walked across the frozen parking lot, closing the distance to the terminal. Every step I took felt like I was crushing 19 years of psychological abuse under my heel. I remembered the cold leather of the restaurant booth where they had relentlessly mocked my career. I remembered the absolute terror of the airport security office when I first saw my real birth certificate. I remembered the 11-year-old girl crying in the back of a police car because her mother planted a diamond necklace in her backpack. Those memories did not weigh me down. They fueled me. They sharpened my focus into an unbreakable weapon. I reached the automatic glass doors and watched them slide open, welcoming me into the arena. I stepped inside the VIP aviation terminal, letting the heavy glass doors seal shut behind me, blocking out the howling Colorado wind. The interior was a masterpiece of modern luxury, designed to cater specifically to the ultra-wealthy. Polished marble floors reflected the warm glow of modern geometric chandeliers, and the air smelled faintly of premium espresso and expensive leather. I walked past the velvet ropes of the waiting lounge, positioning myself perfectly behind a thick frosted glass partition. From this vantage point, I had an unobstructed view of the main concierge desk without being detected. Richard and Vanessa stood at the pristine mahogany counter. They were practically vibrating with arrogant anticipation. Outside on the frosted tarmac, their chartered Gulfstream jet was waiting, its massive engines already whining in preparation for the long flight to the Caribbean. I pressed my finger against my earpiece. "I am in position," I whispered. "Copy that." Jamal replied, his voice a low, steady hum in my ear. "The terminal manager is engaging them now." I watched as the terminal manager, a sharply dressed man with an impeccably professional demeanor, typed on his sleek computer terminal. He looked up at Richard with a practiced customer service smile. "Everything is ready for your departure, sir," the manager said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet, spacious terminal. "The flight plan to the Cayman Islands has been filed, and the ground crew has finished loading your luggage. I just need to process the final fueling and runway clearance fees. The total comes to $25,000. Richard let out a booming, magnanimous laugh. He was playing the role of the careless billionaire to absolute perfection. "A small price to pay for an early escape from the snow," he declared, leaning casually against the mahogany counter. He reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. With a theatrical flick of his wrist, he produced his exclusive heavy metal black card. He slid it across the polished wood toward the manager, leaving a faint streak on the mahogany. It was the ultimate status symbol, a card with no predetermined spending limit, fueled entirely by the millions he had stolen from my father's legacy. I watched the manager pick up the heavy card. He swiped it through the terminal reader. The machine processed for 2 seconds. Then a sharp, piercing beep cut through the quiet room. The manager frowned, looking at the digital display. "I am sorry, sir," he said, his customer service smile faltering just a fraction. "It seems the card has been declined." Richard scoffed, shaking his head in immediate aggressive annoyance. He did not feel a single ounce of fear yet. He was far too arrogant to believe a financial error could actually apply to him. "That is impossible," he snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "Run it again. Your machine is probably malfunctioning. Do you have any idea how much money is in that account?" The manager remained polite, but his posture stiffened slightly. "Of course, sir. I will try it manually." He keyed in the numbers. The machine processed. Another sharp, loud beep echoed across the desk. "Declined." I felt a dark, profound satisfaction spreading through my chest. The federal injunction was working flawlessly. Jamal's legal team had successfully severed Richard's entire financial nervous system. "There must be a security hold because of the international flight plan," Richard muttered, his face flushing with a sudden prickle of embarrassment. He hated looking foolish in front of service staff. He snatched the black card from the manager's hand and shoved it back into his wallet. "It does not matter. Use my secondary corporate account." He pulled out a silver business card and threw it onto the counter. I watched his jaw tighten. The careless billionaire act was starting to fracture, showing the ugly, impatient man underneath. The manager swiped the silver card. The machine did not even process for 2 seconds this time. It rejected the transaction instantly with an angry mechanical buzz. "Declined." The terminal manager took a deliberate step back from the counter. His subservient demeanor vanished completely, replaced by the cautious skepticism reserved for people who tried to charter luxury jets with fraudulent funds. "I apologize, sir, but this card is also returning a hard decline from your financial institution." Richard's face transitioned from flushed embarrassment to genuine outrage. He slammed his fist against the mahogany counter, startling the manager. "Listen to me, you incompetent fool," he hissed, leaning over the desk. "I am flying out of here today. Call your corporate office. Call my bank. I have tens of millions of dollars. You are holding up my flight over a technical glitch." Vanessa sighed dramatically, pushing her way to the front of the counter. She rolled her eyes at Richard, letting her impatience show. "Honestly, Richard, you always make things so difficult. Your bank is probably throwing a fit over the transfer limits again. Just let me handle it." She pushed Richard aside and unzipped her designer handbag. She pulled out a pristine platinum credit card attached directly to the primary shell company, the exact company where Jamal was listed as the secondary executive officer. She flashed a patronizing smile at the manager. "Use this one," she instructed, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "And please expedite it. We have a schedule to keep." I leaned closer to the frosted glass partition, my heart hammering with sheer adrenaline. This was the kill shot. The manager swiped Vanessa's platinum card. The terminal screen lit up, but it did not beep with a standard decline. It flashed a solid bright red warning block across the entire display. The manager stared at the screen. He looked up at Vanessa, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and severe professional alarm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, cautious register. "This card is not declined. It is returning a code for a hard federal freeze. The terminal is instructing me to confiscate the card and contact the authorities. Your entire account status is listed as frozen." Vanessa's patronizing smile completely evaporated. She stared at the manager, her mouth falling open. "Frozen," she repeated, her voice hollow. "What do you mean frozen? That is a corporate holding account. There is over $10 million in that account." "Not anymore," I whispered to myself, gripping the edge of the glass partition. Richard grabbed Vanessa's arm, pulling her back from the counter. His eyes were wide, darting around the terminal with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. The realization was hitting him like a physical blow to the stomach. A declined card was a glitch. A federal freeze on a shell company account was a death sentence. He knew exactly what that meant. Someone had breached their fortress. Someone had found the money. "Check the other accounts," Richard barked at Vanessa, panic bleeding into his voice. "Check the mobile banking app right now." Vanessa fumbled with her phone, her manicured hands shaking so violently she dropped it onto the floor. She scrambled to pick it up, her pristine white coat sweeping against the dirty tile. She unlocked the screen and opened their primary banking application. I watched her face as the dashboard loaded. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a literal ghost. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide and unblinking. The phone slipped from her fingers again, clattering against the marble. "Zero." She choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Richard, the balances. Every single account says zero. We are locked out." Richard grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. "What are you talking about? Try the investment portal. Try the offshore routing app." "It is all gone, Richard," she screamed, her voice cracking with absolute terror. "The money is gone. Everything is frozen. We have nothing." The physical manifestation of their financial ruin crashed down on them. I watched Richard stagger backward, his hand clutching his chest, as if he could not pull air into his lungs. The reality of their situation was suffocating them right there in the middle of the luxury terminal. They had no cash. They had no plane. They had no escape. They were utterly, entirely trapped. Entirely. I stood behind the frosted glass, savoring the absolute destruction of their reality. The mighty empire built on my father's stolen legacy had been wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of seconds. I stepped out from behind the frosted glass partition, my boots clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. The sharp sound cut through the frantic, hyperventilating panic, consuming Richard and Vanessa. They spun around simultaneously, their faces pale and slick with cold sweat. Before either of them could utter a single word of manufactured outrage or demand an explanation, the main automatic glass doors of the VIP terminal slid open with a heavy mechanical hiss. A violent blast of freezing Colorado wind rushed into the luxurious terminal, bringing with it the undeniable presence of absolute authority. 3 federal agents entered, moving with coordinated tactical precision. They wore dark tactical gear, with the letters FBI emblazoned across their protective vests, in bold yellow print. Their hands rested easily on their utility belts, projecting a lethal combination of calm and unyielding control. The terminal manager instantly stepped back, raising his hands submissively as the agent secured the perimeter. Walking perfectly in step with the lead federal agent was Jamal Vance. He looked like an executioner arriving in a bespoke charcoal suit. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched tight, and his dark eyes locked onto his wife with the intensity of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. He radiated a cold corporate fury that completely commanded the room. Vanessa let out a sharp, desperate gasp. The absolute terror that had paralyzed her just seconds ago instantly morphed into a pathetic display of manufactured victimhood. Her delusional mind could not comprehend the reality of the situation. She completely ignored the armed federal agents flanking her husband and saw only her designated savior. She genuinely believed her golden child aura could distort reality itself. She sprinted across the marble floor, her expensive white coat billowing behind her, reaching out to grab Jamal by the lapels of his tailored jacket. "Jamal, thank God you are here," Vanessa cried, her voice trembling with weaponized tears. "It is an absolute nightmare. The bank made some catastrophic error and my cards are not working. They froze the corporate accounts, and Clara is completely losing her mind. She ran away from the resort last night, and now there are federal agents here. You have to fix this, Jamal. Tell them who you are. Call your compliance department. Call your legal team and make them release our funds immediately. We are going to miss our flight to the Caymans." Jamal did not reach out to hold her. He did not offer a comforting embrace or a reassuring word. He stood as immovable as a concrete pillar, letting her manicured hands clutch uselessly at his pristine lapels. He looked down at her with a gaze so entirely devoid of affection, it could have frozen the jet fuel sitting on the tarmac outside. The illusion of their marriage, the carefully curated facade she had maintained for years, evaporated under his clinical scrutiny. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat, moving with deliberate, unhurried precision. He withdrew a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. He held the papers up deliberately, wedging them between his chest and Vanessa's desperate, grasping hands. He stared directly into her tear-filled eyes, refusing to let her look away. "I do not save tax evaders," Jamal stated, his voice echoing through the quiet terminal with the devastating finality of a judge passing sentence. He did not blink. He did not raise his voice. He simply opened his fingers and let the thick stack of legal documents flutter to the marble floor, landing directly on the tips of Vanessa designer boots. "Sign the divorce papers before they put the cuffs on you." Vanessa stumbled backward, as if he had physically struck her. She looked down at the divorce papers scattered across the floor and then back up at her husband, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her mind. The safety net she had relied on her entire adult life had just wrapped itself around her throat. Richard finally found his voice, stepping forward with false bravado, attempting to salvage his crumbling empire. "Now see here, Jamal," he barked, pointing a trembling finger at his son-in-law. "I do not know what kind of stunt you think you are pulling, but you work for my daughter. You will call the bank right now and authorize the release of those funds, or I will personally see to it that your career is destroyed." Jamal turned his cold gaze to Richard. "You do not have the power to destroy a paper cup, Richard. You are a parasite. You used my name to bypass federal banking regulations. You forged my signature on federal tax documents to launder $45 million stolen from a traumatized child. I am not here to release your funds. I am the one who froze them. I filed the injunction. I handed the forensic audit to a federal judge at 2 in the morning. Your empire is gone because I tore it down." I walked forward, closing the distance until I stood shoulder to shoulder with Jamal. I looked at the two people who had made my life a living hell for 19 years. They were no longer the terrifying, untouchable monsters of my childhood. They were just two pathetic, cornered thieves, realizing the exits were all sealed. "You told me to sign that medical release form at dinner last night," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "You thought I was too broken and stupid to read the fine print. You thought I would just hand over an irrevocable power of attorney so you could finalize the wire transfer and run. But I signed that paper knowing your accounts were already locked. I signed it because I wanted you to pack your bags, drive to the airport, and stand here thinking you had won right before you lost everything. Richard staggered back, bracing his hand against a leather lounge chair to keep from collapsing. Vanessa dropped to her knees on the marble floor, staring blankly at the divorce papers, her hands shaking violently. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The metallic click of the restraints unlocking echoed sharply through the terminal, signaling the absolute end of their reign. The metallic click of the restraints unlocking echoed sharply through the terminal, signaling the absolute end of their reign. Richard heard that sound, and the last remaining fragments of his arrogant facade shattered completely. His knees gave out beneath him, hitting the polished marble floor with a heavy, sickening thud. This was the man who had spent nearly 2 decades masquerading as an untouchable titan of industry, a self-made billionaire who looked down on the rest of the world from the balcony of a stolen mansion. Now he was just an old, terrified fraud kneeling in a puddle of his own making. The custom-tailored charcoal suit that had always served as his armor suddenly looked ridiculously oversized, drooping off his shoulders as his entire physical posture collapsed inward. He looked up at me, and for the very first time in my 32 years of existence, I did not see condescension or disgust in his eyes. I saw pure, unadulterated terror. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs, his hands trembling uncontrollably against his thighs. He tried to project authority, but the illusion was dead. The federal agents began to move forward, forming a tight tactical perimeter around the kneeling man and his sobbing daughter. "Clara, please." Richard choked out, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of his imminent incarceration. "You cannot let them do this. You have to tell them to stop. We can fix this. I will give it all back. I will sign whatever you want. Just tell Jamal to release the freeze. Tell the agents it was a massive misunderstanding." I stood motionless, looking down at the man who had orchestrated my childhood torment. "A misunderstanding," I repeated, letting the word hang in the cold air of the VIP terminal. "You forged banking documents. You laundered stolen funds across international borders. You engineered a fraudulent conservatorship to strip a grieving child of her legacy. The federal government does not negotiate misunderstandings, Richard. They prosecute felonies." The desperation in his eyes morphed into a pathetic, grasping attempt at emotional manipulation. He crawled forward a few inches on the hard marble floor, lifting his trembling hands toward me. He was abandoning his pride entirely, banking on the hope that the traumatized 11-year-old girl he had kicked out into the snow still craved his paternal approval. "I raised you, Clara," he pleaded, tears finally spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. "I took you into my home when your mother brought you to me. I put food on your table for 11 years. I kept a roof over your head. I paid for your clothes and your school and your medical bills. You cannot just erase that. You owe me for those years. You owe me for keeping you alive before things got difficult. We are family. You have to remember the good times." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I held my ground and let his desperate guilt trip wash over me, failing to penetrate even a single layer of the impenetrable armor I had forged over the last decade. He was using the bare minimum requirements of human decency, keeping a child alive as currency, to buy his way out of federal prison. It was the ultimate display of his narcissistic delusion. I stared down at the man who had ruined my childhood, my expression locking into the clinical detachment of a forensic accountant delivering a final devastating audit. "I ran the numbers, Richard," I stated, my voice projecting absolute icy authority across the quiet terminal. "I calculated the exact cost of raising a child in a middle-class household for 11 years. I factored in inflation, food, housing, and basic clothing. Then I took that number and subtracted the $45 million you stole from my biological father. I added the compound interest you accrued while funneling that money into your personal shell companies. The final mathematical equation does not result in me owing you a single shred of gratitude. It equals about 20 years in federal prison. Enjoy the math." Richard's mouth dropped open, his desperate pleas dying in his throat. He stared at me, realizing that the submissive scapegoat he had relied upon to fund his luxurious existence was truly dead. I was not his daughter. I was his executioner. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Richard's shoulder. Richard, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and federal tax evasion. The agent announced, his voice loud and unwavering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Two agents hauled Richard to his feet, roughly pulling his arms behind his back. The heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted shut around his wrists, biting into his skin. Beside him, Vanessa was still kneeling on the floor, sobbing hysterically over the scattered divorce papers. A female agent grabbed her firmly by the arm, hauling her upright and securing her wrists with equal efficiency. Vanessa screamed, kicking out blindly, but the agents held her in an iron grip, easily subduing her frantic thrashing. Process them for transport, the lead agent commanded, signaling to his team. The agents did not offer any courtesy to the disgraced socialites. They reached out and forcefully stripped the heavy, luxurious designer coats off Richard and Vanessa's shoulders, leaving them in their thin, tailored indoor clothing. The coats were tossed onto a nearby luggage cart, seized as evidence of assets purchased with illicit funds. Wait! Vanessa shrieked, shivering violently as the cold air from the automatic doors hit her exposed arms. You cannot take my coat. It is freezing outside. I demand you give it back to me. You do not demand anything anymore, the female agent replied coldly, pushing Vanessa forward. Move. The automatic glass doors slid open completely, exposing the terminal to the brutal, howling Colorado blizzard. The sudden drop in temperature was shocking, but the agents marched their prisoners straight out onto the frozen tarmac without hesitation. I followed them to the glass partition, watching the scene unfold with Jamal standing silently by my side. Richard and Vanessa were dragged across the icy pavement, slipping and stumbling in their expensive, impractical shoes. The biting wind whipped through their thin clothing, chilling them to the bone. They shivered uncontrollably, their teeth chattering as the freezing reality of their new life finally settled over them. The private Gulfstream jet they had chartered to fly them to the tropical tax haven sat parked just 100 yards away, a massive mocking monument to their failure. Instead of walking up the plush carpeted stairs of the private plane, they were forcefully shoved toward two waiting black police cruisers with flashing red and blue lights cutting through the thick morning fog. An agent pushed Richard head down, forcing him into the cramped back seat of the first cruiser, while Vanessa was shoved into the second, her hysterical sobbing muffled by the heavy reinforced doors slamming shut. The engines of the police vehicles roared to life, leaving fresh tracks in the pristine snow as they drove away from the luxury aviation terminal, carrying the thieves away to a federal holding facility. I watched the taillights disappear into the blinding white blizzard, feeling the crushing weight of the last 19 years finally lift off my chest. The legal fallout from the Aspen arrests was swift and absolute. The federal government does not move slowly when presented with a perfectly assembled 50-page dossier of wire fraud, forgery, and international money laundering. I did not have to testify in open court. The paper trail Jamal and I provided was so overwhelmingly condemning that Richard and Vanessa legal defense teams immediately pushed for plea deals to avoid the maximum sentencing guidelines. 6 months after the freezing tarmac confrontation, the judge handed down the sentences. Richard, the man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of self-made superiority, was sentenced to 18 years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny, wire fraud, and exploiting a minor conservatorship. The judge specifically noted his calculated cruelty in the sentencing remarks, ensuring Richard would not be eligible for early parole. Vanessa, whose forged signature had triggered the entire collapse, received 12 years for identity theft and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The Golden Child was officially a federal inmate, stripped of her designer clothes and forced into a standard-issue jumpsuit. Diana, however, managed to avoid a prison sentence. True to her survivalist nature, she had immediately turned state witness the moment the FBI detained her in Seattle. She traded every single detail of Richard and Vanessa offshore plotting in exchange for full legal immunity. She provided the emails, the deleted text messages, and the financial ledgers they had kept hidden in their safe. She sold out her husband and her favored daughter without a second of hesitation just to save her own skin. But immunity from prison did not mean immunity from consequence. The federal court system was ruthless in its asset forfeiture protocols. Because Diana had been a direct beneficiary of the stolen trust funds, the government systematically stripped her of everything. The sprawling suburban mansion was seized and auctioned off. Her luxury vehicles were repossessed. Her jewelry, including the diamond necklace she had used to frame me at 11 years old, was confiscated and liquidated to repay the estate. The court left her with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back and a few personal items that could be proven were not purchased with my father's money. Diana, the woman who had traded her daughter for financial security, was suddenly 60 years old, completely broke, and entirely alone. 3 weeks after the sentencing wrapped up, I was sitting in my newly expanded office in downtown Seattle. The space was sleek, modern, and buzzing with the quiet energy of my growing forensic accounting team. My assistant knocked softly on the glass door, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Clara," she said, stepping into the office, "there is a woman in the lobby demanding to see you. She says she is your mother. She does not look well, and she is refusing to leave until she speaks with you." I did not feel a spike of anxiety or the familiar tightening in my chest. I felt absolutely nothing. "Send her in," I instructed, closing the audit file on my monitor. Diana walked into my office a few moments later. The transformation was jarring. The polished, arrogant woman who had sneered at me across the dinner table in Aspen was completely gone. She looked frail, her hair unkempt, and her clothes ill-fitting. She clutched a cheap canvas tote bag against her chest, looking around my expansive office with wide, desperate eyes. "Clara," she started, her voice trembling as she took a tentative step toward my desk. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to be here." "You do not," I agreed, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. "Make it quick, Diana. I have a firm to run." She flinched at the use of her first name, but she swallowed her pride and continued. "I have nothing, Clara. The government took everything. The house, the cars, the accounts. They even took my retirement savings because they proved Richard funded it with your trust. I am living in a tiny studio apartment in the industrial district. I cannot afford electricity this month." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. I remembered the freezing nights in my tiny college apartment, rationing ramen noodles because she had refused to co-sign a loan for me. I remembered the darkness of the disciplinary school. I was hoping, she continued, tears welling in her eyes, that since you recovered the full $45 million, you might consider setting up a small stipend for me, just enough to cover basic rent and groceries. I am your mother, Clara. I gave you life. You have so much now. A few thousand a month would not even register in your accounts, but it would save my life. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I reached inside and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I did not slide it across the mahogany. I simply held it out, forcing her to walk forward and take it from my hand. Diana looked down at the paper. Her tears instantly stopped, replaced by profound confusion. "This is an employment application," she said, her voice dropping. "It is an application for a commercial janitorial service that cleans this building." I clarified, my tone perfectly even. "They are currently hiring night shift staff. It pays minimum wage, but it offers basic health benefits and steady hours." Diana's face flushed with sudden indignation, the old arrogant entitlement flaring up for a brief second. "You want me to scrub floors, Clara? I am 60 years old. I was the wife of a CEO. I cannot do manual labor." "You were the wife of a thief," I corrected sharply. "And you are going to scrub floors because you have absolutely no other marketable skills. You spent your entire adult life living off the blood and sweat of other people. You threw me away at 11 years old so you could live in luxury. You taught me that survival means depending entirely on yourself." I stood up, leaning my palms flat against the mahogany desk, my eyes locked onto hers. "You taught me independence, Mom. It is time you practice it. I am not your safety net. I am not your conservator. And I am definitely not your daughter. Diana stared at the employment application, her hands trembling so violently the paper shook. She looked up at me, searching my face for any lingering trace of the desperate child who used to beg for her affection. She found absolutely nothing but a reflection of her own cold ruthlessness. She turned around without saying another word. She walked out of my office, her shoulders slumped in total defeat, clutching the janitorial application like a lifeline. She was finally stepping into the reality she had created for herself. The woman who had sacrificed my childhood for a mansion was going to spend her twilight years scrubbing toilets to survive. The ledger was finally perfectly balanced. 2 years after the Aspen tarmac confrontation, I stepped out of the private elevator and into my ultra-modern Seattle penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping panoramic view of Puget Sound, the water shimmering under the late afternoon sun. I was 32 years old, and the $45 million trust my father had left me was finally securely and legally under my complete control. The heavy burden of a stolen legacy had been lifted, replaced by the quiet, absolute confidence of total financial independence. I dropped my keys onto the sleek marble console table and slipped off my heels. The penthouse was a far cry from the cramped apartments I had lived in while building my career, but I had not let the money change my fundamental drive. Many people inheriting a $45 million fortune would have immediately retired, opting for a life of endless vacations and luxury consumption. I was not one of those people. My work was not just a job, it was a vocation. It was the very thing that had saved me. I walked into my expansive home office, the same room where I had once furiously audited my own family financial crimes. The workstation was even more advanced now, but the purpose remained exactly the same. I was still a forensic accountant, but my agency had evolved significantly. The influx of capital allowed me to expand operations far beyond corporate embezzlement and high-stakes divorces. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and pulled up the latest operational reports. I had officially launched a dedicated pro bono wing within my firm specifically designed to investigate and dismantle fraudulent conservatorships and abusive trust mismanagement. I hired a team of elite auditors and specialized legal consultants who focused exclusively on protecting vulnerable minors and incapacitated individuals from predatory guardians. We were actively taking down people exactly like Richard and Diana. Every case we accepted felt like a personal victory. We untangled complex shell companies, exposed forged signatures, and forced corrupt family court judges to answer for their negligence. I poured my resources into ensuring that no child would ever have to experience the total systemic abandonment I had survived. The work was demanding, often heartbreaking, but incredibly fulfilling. I was using the very weapon forged in my trauma to protect others. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the far wall of the office. Among the framed degrees and corporate commendations hung a single newspaper clipping preserved behind museum-grade glass. It was a front-page business article from a major national publication detailing the spectacular and highly public downfall of Richard real estate empire. The headline read, "The House of Cards Collapses. Fake millionaire sentenced to 18 years in sweeping federal fraud case." The article meticulously outlined how Richard had built his entire reputation on the stolen wealth of a traumatized minor. It described the dramatic Aspen airport arrest and the subsequent freezing of all his assets. It painted a portrait of a greedy, arrogant man who thought he could outsmart the federal government and his own stepdaughter. I looked at that clipping every single day. It was not a monument to vengeance, it was a testament to survival. It reminded me that the people who thought they could bury me had completely underestimated the strength they were forcing me to develop. They had thrown me out at 11, expecting me to disappear into the cracks of the system. Instead, I had clawed my way back, leveraging my intellect and resilience to rip their stolen crown right off their heads. The penthouse was quiet, but it was not the lonely, oppressive silence of my childhood boarding school. It was the peaceful silence of a life fully controlled and completely owned. I had forged an empire of justice out of a legacy of deceit. I was no longer the frightened girl trying to earn the love of monsters. I was the woman who had brought the monsters to their knees. My phone vibrated on the desk, pulling me from my reflection. The caller ID displayed Jamal's name. I smiled, picking up the device. The forensic accountant was always on call, and there was always another ledger to audit, another lie to expose, and another empire waiting to be dismantled. "I am already in the elevator." Jamal's voice came through the speaker, replacing the need for a formal greeting. "And I brought the good roast from that place down the street." I ended the call and leaned back in my chair as the heavy glass door of my office swung open. Jamal walked in holding 2 steaming cups of coffee and a thick physical file folder tucked securely under his arm. It had been 2 years since the chaotic freezing tarmac in Aspen. The aftermath of that day had not just destroyed my biological family, it had completely reshaped my professional world. Jamal had moved with the same ruthless efficiency I did. He finalized his divorce from Vanessa in record time, stripping away her last desperate attempts to claim any portion of his assets. The Vanguard Financial Board had fully exonerated him once they saw the undeniable proof that he was a victim of identity theft. But Jamal had realized the corporate ladder lost its appeal when you knew how easily the rungs could be manipulated by bad actors. 6 months after the trial, he had walked into my newly expanded headquarters and offered me a partnership. It was the most logical business decision I had ever made. My firm specialized in the forensic dissection of fraudulent accounts, and Jamal brought a terrifying level of regulatory compliance expertise. Together, we formed an impenetrable corporate immune system. We did not just find the stolen money, we built the legal cages that ensured the thieves could never touch the financial sector again. He handed me one of the coffee cups and dropped the thick file onto my mahogany desk. The bold red letters on the tab indicated it was a new intake for our pro bono wing. "Tell me we caught another one," I said, taking a sip of the dark roast. "We caught a massive one," Jamal replied, settling into the leather chair opposite my desk. A regional guardian in Oregon managing the estates of 12 different incapacitated seniors. He has been funneling their pension payouts through a network of fake shell charities. He thought because they had severe dementia, nobody would ever notice the missing funds. I felt the familiar adrenaline spike, the sharp thrill of the hunt. How sloppy is he? Arrogant and sloppy, Jamal chuckled, shaking his head. He used the exact same tax ID number for 3 different fake charities. I ran the basic compliance checks this morning. The guy practically drew us a map directly to his personal offshore accounts. I let out a genuine loud laugh. The sound bounced off the glass walls of my office. "It never ceases to amaze me," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "These people build entire castles out of stolen bricks, and they always leave the front door wide open." Jamal smiled, taking a relaxed sip of his coffee. "Arrogance is the best tool we have, Clara. They never expect anyone to actually look under the floorboards." I looked at Jamal across the desk. He was relaxed, his posture loose and comfortable. The rigid defensive executive I had ambushed in that underground parking garage 2 years ago was gone. We had both been burned by the exact same fire. We had both been utilized as props in a theatrical display of toxic greed. Surviving that mutual destruction had forged a bond between us that felt thicker and more permanent than any biological tie I had ever known. For 19 years I had agonized over my lack of family. I had let Diana and Richard convince me that I was an inherently unlovable burden. I had believed that blood was the ultimate currency of human connection, and because my blood had rejected me, I was destined to be alone. I had spent my entire childhood chasing a ghost of a family that never actually existed. Sitting here in the sunlight of my penthouse office, sharing a laugh with a man who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me against the absolute worst moments of our lives, I finally understood the truth. Family is not defined by shared DNA. It is not defined by a last name or a birth certificate, and it is certainly not defined by the toxic, traumatic loyalty that demands you set yourself on fire just to keep your abusers warm. Family is defined by the people who stand beside you when the world is burning. It is the people who hand you the fire extinguisher instead of asking you why you let the house catch fire. Jamal had every reason to walk away from me that day in the parking garage. He could have protected his own career and let me fight Richard and Vanessa entirely alone. But he chose to stand his ground. He chose to look at the ugly, terrifying truth and fight back alongside me. That was what real loyalty looked like. Real family respects your boundaries. They do not view your independence as a threat to their control. They celebrate your victories without trying to steal the credit for themselves. They protect your light instead of trying to snuff it out to hide their own darkness. I thought about Diana scrubbing floors in her studio apartment and Richard sitting in a federal cell. They had spent decades trying to steal my light because they were utterly hollow inside. "You are staring again," Jamal observed, bringing me back to the present moment. He tapped his coffee cup against the edge of the desk. "Are you ready to tear this Oregon Guardian apart? Or do you need a minute to finish your internal monologue?" "I am ready," I said, pulling the file toward me and flipping it open to the first page of financial disclosures. I was just thinking about how much I love this job. "We are the monsters that the monsters are afraid of," Jamal said, a fierce, determined glint in his eye. "Exactly," I replied. I picked up my pen, ready to start tracing the lines of stolen money. I was 32 years old. I had reclaimed my father's legacy. I had built an empire of justice. And looking across the desk at my chosen family, I knew I would never be alone again. The past was finally buried, and the future was entirely mine. I looked away from the file on my desk and stood up from my chair, walking over to the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The Seattle skyline stretched out before me, a sprawling network of glass and steel reflecting the late afternoon sun. Down below, millions of people were going about their lives, completely unaware of the invisible wars being fought in boardrooms, courtrooms, and private estates. I watched the ferries glide across the dark water of Puget Sound, feeling the profound stillness that only comes after a lifelong storm has finally broken. For 19 years, my internal landscape had been a battleground of anxiety, self-doubt, and a desperate craving for validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. Now, looking out at the city I helped protect from corporate predators, I felt nothing but an unshakable solid peace. I thought back to the freezing tarmac in Aspen. I thought about Richard kneeling on the cold marble floor begging for mercy from the very child he had systematically destroyed. I thought about Vanessa screaming as the federal agent stripped her of her designer coat, her entire identity crumbling the moment she realized her stolen wealth was gone. And I thought about Diana scrubbing floors in a dark industrial building, paying the ultimate price for her cowardice and greed. It would be easy to look at their ruin and feel a sense of vindictive joy. But the truth was far more clinical. Forensic accounting teaches you that every action leaves a trace, every stolen dollar creates a deficit, and eventually every unbalanced ledger must be reconciled. My family had run a deficit of basic human decency for 2 decades. The universe simply called in the debt. I walked back to my desk and ran my hand along the polished mahogany edge. The pro bono wing of my firm was thriving. Every week we took on new cases representing minors and seniors who had been trapped in fraudulent conservatorships by predatory relatives. We used the exact same aggressive auditing tactics that I had used against Richard to tear apart corrupt guardians and return stolen lives to their rightful owners. It was grueling, demanding work, but it was the ultimate form of alchemy. I was taking the deepest poison of my past and transmuting it into a cure for others. I turned to face the camera, speaking directly to everyone who has ever felt the crushing weight of being the family's scapegoat. I know what it feels like to be the dumping ground for your family insecurities. I know the unique agony of watching the people who are supposed to protect you actively conspire to tear you down. When you are raised by narcissists and opportunists, you are conditioned to believe that your mistreatment is your own fault. They meticulously construct a reality where you are the problem, the burden, the broken one. They do this because if you are busy fixing yourself, you will never notice that they are the ones breaking you. They threw me out at 11 because they thought I was a burden. They didn't realize they were throwing me into the fire that would forge me into a weapon. When they reached out 19 years later, they expected to find a victim. Instead, they found the blade that cut their rotten family tree at the root. Every cold night in that boarding school, every predatory student loan I had to take out, every hour I spent studying financial law while working multiple jobs was a strike of the hammer against the anvil. The adversity did not break me. It stripped away my naivety and hardened my resolve into something impenetrable. They wanted me to become the delinquent they claimed I was, so their narrative would hold up in court. They severely miscalculated. The $45 million I reclaimed was never the ultimate prize. The money secures my future and funds the pro bono work that protects other vulnerable people. But the true victory was entirely psychological. The true victory was standing in that VIP terminal, looking at the people who had haunted my nightmares, and realizing they possessed absolutely no power over me anymore. I did not need to scream or cry or negotiate for my humanity. I simply presented the data, executed the legal strategy, and watched the consequences of their own actions swallow them whole. Justice is not about matching the cruelty of your abusers. It is about exposing them to the blinding light of the truth and letting their own lies burn them to ash. If you are currently sitting in the dark, wondering if you will ever escape the shadow of a toxic family, I need you to listen to me carefully. The skills you are forced to develop just to survive their abuse, the hypervigilance, the emotional intelligence, the ability to read a room and anticipate a threat, are the exact skills that will make you unstoppable once you break free. You are not damaged goods. You are highly trained. And when you finally step into your own power, the very people who tried to keep you small will be utterly terrified of the giant you have become. You do not owe your abusers your silence. You do not owe them your loyalty, and you certainly do not owe them your future. You have the absolute right to protect yourself using every legal, professional, and intellectual tool at your disposal. You have the right to build an empire out of the stones they threw at you. The truth is an absolute defense, and when you wield it without fear, there is no false narrative strong enough to withstand the impact. Family is supposed to have your back, not stab it for a payout. Have you ever had to use your own professional skills to completely expose a toxic relative? Let me know your story in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of absolute karma. The story of Clara illustrates a profound truth about human resilience. The very fire meant to destroy, you can forge you into an unbreakable weapon. When stripped of love, security, and belonging at a tender age, it is easy to succumb to the false narrative written by abusers. They rely on their victims remaining small, broken, and consumed by self-doubt. However, the ultimate lesson here is that trauma does not have to be a lifelong cage. It can become the unshakable foundation of your ultimate empowerment. By choosing to meticulously educate herself and build an independent life, she transformed her deepest vulnerabilities into a specialized professional arsenal. Every hardship she endured sharpened her intellect, hypervigilance, and emotional resilience. When the time came to face the people who had exploited her, she did not fight them with raw, chaotic emotion or desperate pleas for validation. Instead, she confronted them with cold, calculated truth, leveraging undeniable data to dismantle their empire of lies. She proves that justice isn't about matching the cruelty of toxic individuals, but rather elevating yourself so far above their reach that their manipulations lose all power. Furthermore, the narrative beautifully redefines the traditional concept of family. Blood ties are frequently weaponized by abusers to demand unconditional loyalty and to excuse unforgivable betrayals. This story systematically dismantles that myth, demonstrating that true family is entirely chosen. It is composed exclusively of those who stand shoulder to shoulder with you in the darkest moments, respecting your boundaries and fiercely protecting your light when others try to extinguish it. We all possess the innate capacity to take the heavy stones thrown at us and construct an empire of our own making. Reclaim your personal narrative today by setting your own unbreakable boundaries and share your own story of triumph in the comments below.